some arm came to my house and ripped me out of my home with my children.
It was immediately apparent to me that the law that allowed such state conduct was unconstitutional.
Scan does not solve crime. It moves it, it displaces it. Evicting people from one place either pushes them into other places or pushes them into homelessness.
It destroyed her home. That's exactly what SCAN operated to do to Ms. Wright. It plunged her into homelessness, into housing instability for quite some time.
It was morning, 2 weeks before Christmas 2020. Celia Wright, a Tan Guachan citizen, was living with her partner, her mother-in-law, and 8 children on this rural property. There was a knock at her door.
The day I met Scan the first time, I was early in my pregnancy, sleeping, because I have an illness that comes on during pregnancy that gives you incredible morning sickness. I heard a very loud knock on my door that woke me up. I checked my doorbell camera to see who was knocking on my door so loudly. And I saw a man with a black toque wearing all black, looking very mean. When I opened the door, there was one man standing there in a square, almost stoic pose. He asked me, I just want to confirm your identity. Are you Celia? Yeah. I have this letter to give you. And I was like, what is Scan? Are you serving me? What is this? And he passed me an envelope. And while I was opening the envelope, he kind of jumped the gun on telling me, you're being evicted. You have 5 days to get out.
It was all a bit unbelievable for Wright, and that's why she decided to take a stand and take the government to the Supreme Court. But believe it or not, under the right circumstances, this could happen to you. If you live in a jurisdiction that has a Safer Communities and Neighbourhoods Act, also known as SCAN. SCAN is legislation enacted in Yukon, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. It allows provincial or territorial officials to take action against a property that is determined to be a safety issue in the community. In Celia Wright's case, there is a complicating element. A month prior to Scan's knock at the door, she was raided by the RCMP and still faces charges related to a cocaine trafficking operation she is alleged to have been a part of. But it is relevant to note that in our legal tradition, people are considered innocent until proven guilty. And a 4-year delay without a trial puts this case in a realm wherein one might reasonably wonder if the charges will be stayed or put aside by the court. So we don't know if Celia Wright was trafficking cocaine, but in terms of her challenge against SCAN legislation, it's not actually relevant, at least according to her lawyer. Lawyer Vincent LaRochelle specifically took on the legislation's ability to direct state agents to destroy a family home in just 5 days. An unconstitutional affront, he argues, whether you're accused of committing a crime or not. More on that in a bit.
My name is Christina Lang. I'm the Director of Public Safety and Investigations for the Yukon Government Department of Justice. With our SCAN officers, as soon as we get a complaint, we'll talk to the complainant and ensure that it meets our specified uses under our mandate. So that would include illegal drug trafficking, illegal firearms trafficking, organized crime. It would include prostitution, activities that are related to illegal activities. It also includes bootlegging, and it includes child exploitation. So as long as it meets one of those specified uses, they'll do some initial investigation into the property, and then they will go and do a door knock.
According to Lang, the door knock goes something like this.
They'll knock on the door and they will talk to the person who there's been a complaint against. And so it's at that moment, and we're very transparent in the process, that the investigators will share what the alleged complaint has been. And it's a great opportunity to connect with that person.
It's a stark contrast with what Celia Wright says she experienced.
You're being evicted. You have 5 days to get out. And I was like, what? 5 days to get out? That's illegal. Like, it's days before Christmas. You can't kick me out. That's crazy. It's the Yukon. Like, it's winter. It actually felt like it was like a standoff or a shootout or whatever. I kind of noticed some other men in the background. There was another man off to the left, and 3 more in behind cars. It felt scary to open the door and to see that many people, like that many scary people dressed non-officially with guns.
At some point since Celia's experience in 2020, the Yukon version of SCAN seems to have changed its eviction deadline.
So when someone gets an eviction notice from SCAN, what is the standard amount of time that they have to get out?
So that's the 14-day evictions that we use, and that's standard under the Residency Landlord Tenancy Act.
Has that amount of time that they give them for the eviction notice, has that changed? Because I thought it used to be 5 days.
So there was a provision for 5 days, and SCAN doesn't use that currently.
Okay.
As it turns out, the amount of notice given ahead of a SCAN eviction is a significant legal issue, and one that has been key in a successful constitutional challenge against SCAN legislation mounted by Celia Wright. But what about the wider context SCAN is operating in?
My name is Kate Meechan. I'm Executive Director with Safe at Home Society. Safe at Home is an organization with a mandate to end and prevent homelessness.
From Meechan's perspective on the front line, SCAN is regarded with a little healthy skepticism.
There are challenges with any sort of legislation that disproportionately impacts vulnerable folks, Indigenous folks, that has the potential to be inherently discriminatory.
SCAN's potential for unfair application against vulnerable people becomes more serious against the backdrop of homelessness in Whitehorse.
We've definitely seen an increase in individuals experiencing homelessness, and sort of needs have become more complex. There's more health issues that are coming along with that, and it seems to be more folks trapped in cycles of chronic homelessness. In July, we were sitting at just over 200 on our by name list. A by name list is a real-time list of all your individuals experiencing homelessness. So, but that number, that's an at least number. We know there are a lot more folks who are not interacting or engaged in our systems of care. We think it's probably closer to about 250.
Meechan says SCAN is showing an interest in being somewhat careful about how it wields its power.
We have had reach outs from individuals from SCAN within Department of Justice who are wanting to build bridges or support, I guess, what they would frame as a better understanding of their intentions in having to enforce SCAN legislation, and really wanting to refer people to eviction prevention.
Yukon SCAN employs a manager, 6 investigators, and 1 analyst, and currently has a budget of $1.2 million. The majority of SCAN complaints are related to drug trafficking. In fact, of the 139 total SCAN complaints in 2023, 133 involved trafficking, and 39 involve organized crime. In response to the 139 complaints, there were 26 warnings from SCAN officials and 8 evictions. 74 of the complaints had other results, which encompasses situations wherein activity ceased and no action was required, there was a referral to another agency, or the complaint was unfounded. And the territorial government apparently wants more of SCAN, recently announcing a plan to increase funding. Meanwhile, Kate White, leader of the Yukon NDP, is still waiting for the review of SCAN the Liberal Justice Minister promised in 2022.
And so we added the review clause and said, look, this needs to happen. It needs to happen in a timely fashion.
The review won't be completed until 2027, but White wants it to take a hard look at how SCAN operates.
You know, according to the website, they say they target properties and not people. But what that means is that there can be people living in a household or on a property that aren't involved in the criminal activity, but they are also wrapped up in the eviction.
As White sees it, a different approach may be in order.
SCAN does not solve crime. It moves it, it displaces it. Evicting people from one place either pushes them into other places or pushes them into homelessness, and that is not an answer to ending crime, right? When we talk about crime, there's so many different things and so many different supports and services that need to be put in place to try to prevent it. How do we support people with substance use? Well, we have to have more access to, you know, supervised consumption, safe supply, and then the ability to go towards treatment if that's what people want, right? How do we encourage that? Well, we give people hope, right? We give them job training, we give them something to look forward to, we give them like a picture of what life could be in another way, right? But like forcing people into homelessness is not gonna solve the problem.
Someone who knows about being forced into homelessness, along with her 8 kids, is Celia Wright. And up next, we'll hear about her decision to challenge SCAN legislation in the Yukon Supreme Court.
How can you put a family in a position to have 5 days to get out? That's crazy. Giving anyone 5 days to pack every single bit of their entire life in the house that they live in is crazy.
The experience of being hit with an eviction notice delivered by government agents 2 weeks before Christmas 2020, ordering Celia Wright, her partner, and 8 children to be out in 5 days, has had a lasting effect.
I'm not the same person I was before. I'm constantly worried about being kicked out for no reason. Somebody can just call you in with a hunch, then you're homeless. I get scared when people come to my door to buy something from the buy and sell. Like, I'm scared that SCAN's gonna assume that one stranger coming to my house to buy an old little kid's snowsuit, that's gonna get me raided, or that's gonna get me scanned.
Despite that, Wright is active not only as an octo parent, but as owner of 2 businesses, a pawn shop and an eyelash studio.
So I've been doing lashes since about 2016, 2017 is when I started taking courses. And I originally started out beside my dining room table, actually. And I would just do people's lashes in my house when my kids were at school or late at night when my kids are in bed. Then I eventually moved to a little studio downtown Main Street. But I had the pawn shop at the same time. I figured, why am I paying rent in multiple places when I could just have them all in one place? It makes more sense. Helping people is probably the best part of owning both of these businesses. It's kind of 2 different walks of life, and it's really fun to merge them together.
But when we start talking about her SCAN eviction, it's immediately upsetting for her.
Every time I think of things, it's kind of like reliving it. I called my mom. She told me not to cry. If worse came to worse, then we could all sleep on our apartment floor, which would be quite the feat with as many people as we had.
The visit from SCAN officers to the property Celia and her family lived at was a jarring experience.
They didn't show me a badge, and they were not in uniforms. They were in all black with a toque, and if they moved slightly or put their hands on their hips, you could see that they had a gun. So the only reason why I thought, oh, maybe they are official is because they had a gun.
And Wright says it was all somewhat mysterious.
They couldn't give us information on who made this happen or how it happened. All they gave me was just one single-page letter saying you need to be out in 5 days. That's all I ever received from them.
In weeks prior to the SCAN visit, Wright and her partner had been raided by the RCMP and were facing stolen property, weapons, and drug charges. And one of the conditions of her arraignment was that she would live at the residence. The 4-year-old charges have not been tried in court, but as the RCMP raid could be relevant to the SCAN eviction, I asked Wright about it.
Why was there a handgun and cocaine at your house?
I don't know. As for relevancy, I would say that my 8 children had nothing to do with anything. They didn't deserve being homeless.
It isn't clear where SCAN got the idea to investigate the property. They investigated for 4 years prior to moving on their eviction. People can give SCAN tips anonymously. However, the eviction notice originated via an RCMP tip or a neighbor's complaint, Wright sees it as a version of an old Canadian trope.
I feel like it's so wrong that some form of, some arm came to my house and ripped me out of my home with my children on my own land. It just brings back some kind of pain from so far back in my blood.
Faced with a 5-day eviction order, Celia Wright didn't just pack up and leave. She pushed back in court and bought a bit more time. First, there was a court-ordered extension of the SCAN eviction, giving them until the end of January 2021 to get out. Then SCAN rescinded its eviction after the landlord gave his own eviction notice with an end of March deadline. This is a move that avoids a hearing but still sees people getting thrown out. Even with a delayed eviction, it was still an ordeal. One of the first stages of which was the realization for Celia Wright that there was no shelter that could accommodate a family of her size.
Everywhere we called, nobody could help us. There's too many kids. There's no practical help for homeless families anywhere in the Yukon.
After about 3 months of living like this, Wright and her family were able to find housing through the Ta'an Council.
The chief, she somehow put a rush on the apartments being built. So we were able to go in, I believe, before they were fully finished, which was the best that she could do, and there was nothing more I could ask for her to do because that was amazing.
But the SCAN experience didn't sit well with Wright.
For one, I just don't think that they should be able to make anyone homeless. If you're going to remove someone from their home, you should have an option for them.
And that's why she called in lawyer Vincent La Rochelle.
It was immediately apparent to me, immediately obvious, that the law that allowed such actions, such state conduct, was unconstitutional.
It was also clear to La Rochelle what SCAN had done to Wright.
Well, I think the simplest, perhaps short and snappy characterization is that it destroyed her home and her family's home. It plunged her into homelessness, into housing instability for quite some time. And she hasn't really fully recovered from that even now, 4 years later.
La Rochelle's challenge of the SCAN legislation in the Yukon Supreme Court made the argument that SCAN amounts to a sort of gentrification enforcement squad.
It means that you're going to be getting more complaints from fancy neighborhoods, from rich neighborhoods that don't want certain types of people in their backyards making noise. And indeed, in the Yukon, they had maps publishing where most of their complaints would come from, and they were very revealing. Those maps made it very clear what the way in which scan evictions were operating. They were operating in a manner that pushes vulnerable, marginalized groups out of these fancier, more well-to-do neighborhoods.
Not only that, La Rochelle says, the law just isn't fair.
They have basically no opportunity to weigh in on any of this until they get the eviction notice from SCAN. There's a completely secret operation that's being mounted against them. They don't even have access to any of that information. They barely know the nature of the allegations and evidence that's collected against them, and then they get an eviction notice. So the procedure that was being followed was fundamentally unfair and contrary to the rules of natural justice.
In the decision, Chief Justice S.M. Duncan zeroed in on the 5-day eviction deadline, saying state evictions with just 5 days' notice are counter to Section 7 of the Charter, wherein we are guaranteed security of the person, something the court determined Wright and her family were deprived of because of the 5-day eviction deadline.
What she has won is for the law, the particular provisions of the SCAN Act, the Safer Communities and Neighborhoods Act, that allow the eviction of people that are subject of a SCAN complaint on 5 days' notice is no longer law. So that law, that provision has been struck down.
It is a precedent that could have ramifications for people coming up against SCAN in the Yukon and other jurisdictions.
I would hope that this movement alone would wake up some other lawyers and make them see, like, oh, maybe this is what we should be doing too. Like, people don't deserve to be homeless. People don't deserve to have their world ripped up like that. People don't deserve 5 days to pack. People deserve time and grace and love and encouragement.